Day 2 of testing in Bahrain was slightly more interrupted than our first day, with our first red flag this morning thanks to a drain cover issue, and an extended afternoon session that saw teams altering their run plans. We'll unpack it all in just a moment. Welcome to Day 2 of the testing show.
So obviously we had a lot more action in Day 2 of testing than we did Day 1. What happened today?
So we had our first red flag of the 3 days, or 2 days so far, of testing because Lewis Hamilton ran over a drain cover on the edge of some curbing, knocked it loose, and then Charles Leclerc ran it over and did some damage to his floor. So obviously we didn't want a repeat of Las Vegas again with some massive damage. So the track inspection team came out, decided that they wanted to stop the morning session a little bit early, and we had an extra hour then added on to the afternoon session to make up for that, which at the end of we had some safety car tests. So we got a little bit of mock racing with all of the protocol things that were going on with restarts. So that was a fun insight into what we might see this time next week. So despite the issues that Charles had this morning, Carlos actually topped the times for today. So how do you think Ferrari went on the whole?
Yeah, Ferrari are definitely looking a lot stronger. Charles is saying that the car is a lot more drivable than the SF23. And they were looking quite strong on long runs as well. I think they were able to manage the tyres a lot better than they were the SF23 as well. Charles also said that he thinks Red Bull are going well, but obviously doesn't have any data to prove this. But all in all, not a bad day for Ferrari. So the other person we saw have a few issues was Checo, who was in the car all day. What went on there?
So he had some problems this morning with a small brake fire on his left brake, I believe. I think that was just caused by some overheating rather than a massive issue, but obviously we don't want that next week when there's points on the line. So they were looking to fix that. They fixed that pretty fast and he went back out on track and did quite a few long runs today. But this afternoon he was coasting back to the pits after an electrical issue, I think. So not the greatest day in terms of reliability for Red Bull after they looked completely bulletproof in Max's hands yesterday. But Sergio still put in some good times. He was P2 by the end of the day. So a solid day for them, I think, overall, that they'll be looking to wrap up tomorrow. So Yuki Tsunoda was in this morning and he had a shortened run in the V-Carbo one, and Daniel Ricciardo took over from him for the full 5 hours this afternoon. How do you think they got on?
They were definitely looking strong. I think Daniel went out on some faster laps towards the end of the afternoon session. Whether they took some fuel out so that he could have a little bit more of a play around with a more nimble car, we don't know. But he was definitely looking quite quick. It wasn't overly fast, but it wasn't too slow either. So there's definitely been a bit of a jump in their performance, I think, from last year. It'll be exciting to see how they go in Bahrain. Obviously, Daniel was targeting a top 5. So whether we'll see him on the podium or not, that would be cool. Maybe we'll get Shui. But yeah, they were looking pretty strong today.
He's actually finished in the top 5 for both days of testing, and they've been managing to put in a lot of laps each day. So I think V-Carb are looking quite good. The car was looking quite planted, and it was going where Daniel was pointing it today. So I think that's always a good sign. They didn't seem to have too much understeer and oversteer, so hopefully they're in a good place.
So how would you sum up the whole day of testing for all of the teams?
I think there's a sense of cautious optimism in the paddock at the moment. I've heard this from a couple of teams today. We saw that Haas, Ayo Komatsu, their new team principal, he was saying that they've managed to go through their run plan, at least 90% of it today, with the interruptions that we've had. And the team are feeling cautiously optimistic. Yes, the timesheets aren't showing it. They've been at the bottom for both days. But there's a sense of confidence, I think, about where they're going with this new leadership. And I feel like this is something we're also seeing for teams like Alpine. Yes, they've not been at the top of the timesheets. They've not been at the bottom either by any means. But they're looking solid. They've got a sense of cautious optimism too, so I think that's my theme of the day. Our first red flag of testing came today as Lewis Hamilton ran over a drain cover, causing it to come loose and then get hit by a Ferrari. Sound familiar? This was a bit different to Carlos's incident in Las Vegas, but Charles' floor was still damaged and needs to be sent back to Maranello for repairs. Luckily, a new floor won't give Ferrari a penalty given that it's pre-season testing. But given that it's a new floor that the team were already pushed on development for to get it ready for Bahrain, they don't have many spares at all. But this has got us wondering, what else is different on this year's Ferrari versus last year's?
According to Fred Vasseur at their launch, the SF24 is 95% new compared to the SF23. So let's take a look at what's changed. Maybe the most obvious change is to their side pods. When the 2022 regulations came in, Ferrari's F175 car had very carved out side pods that followed an outwashing concept. But they reduced the size of these on the SF23, and now they appear to be almost gone altogether, with the team adopting the Red Bull-like undercut solution we've seen on most of the grid so far this year. The depth of this undercut is something they've been able to achieve by lowering the side impact structure. 2 tubes that stick out from either side of the cockpit on the sides of the chassis that decelerate the impact in the event of a side-on crash. This new deep undercut will mean that there are changes to the airflow along the floor edges, and therefore the underfloor, but of course we can't see these yet. Ferrari have added an extended lower edge to the sidepod inlet, as we first saw from Red Bull last season and are seeing on most of the cars for 2024. Unlike Aston Martin's on the AMR24, which was far more curved, the shape to the SF24's is more conventional and squared off. Ferrari's first day of testing was relatively quiet as they worked through their programme, but today they had a bit more interruption due to the red flag and some repairs needed. But the team are confident that they have a good foundation to continue working to better understand their car, and that's all you can ask for at this point in the season. As the team settled into their run plans for this test, we saw Red Bull and Mercedes competing long runs. But what are these, and why spend your limited testing time effectively running a mock Grand Prix?
Day 2 of testing saw lots of drivers doing long runs or race simulations. But what are these? Race runs, long runs or race simulations are when teams will effectively pretend that they're doing a full Grand Prix in terms of distance, tyres and pit stops, allowing them to get a view of how their car performs over the full 300 kilometres. The team are looking for consistency from their drivers for these multi-lap simulations, so they can get a view of how their tyre management is looking, how reliable the car is, and make sure that the team gets some pit stop practice as if it were a real race. During this afternoon's session, we saw many drivers including Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez and Daniel Ricciardo complete a race simulation. And our first clue to this happening was that the team moved all the tyres into the garage as if they were preparing for a race. Mercedes have been focused on their race pace more than qualifying so far, as George also completed a race run on day 1, which meant he was 13th on the timing sheets despite running into the evening when we usually see lap times become faster. Doing these long runs not only gives the team a view of how well their car will do over a Grand Prix distance, but subsequently they get lots of informative data to analyse, making them a valuable use of their limited time. While some teams chose to focus on long runs today, others were using the tools they had at their disposal to run experiments, one of which is FlowViz.
The teams have several tools at their disposal for extracting as much data as possible during this pre-season test, and one of these is Flow Visualization Paint, or FlowViz. FlowViz is brightly coloured, often neon paint that gets spread over a part of an F1 car like their front wing, side pod, rear wing, or even everywhere. When the car is driven on track, the paint gets moved around by the airflow and forms patterns showing the flow of air around these key areas of the car. When the car returns to the garage, the team will take photos of these paint patterns and send them off to be analysed by the engineers. Effectively, FlowViz allows a team to see what is usually invisible. But sometimes the paint itself is also invisible, and this is something we saw Mercedes using today. Some teams will use paint that can only be seen under ultraviolet light so that their rivals can't get a look at their results. Each application of FlowViz paint is an experiment, and often teams will run more than one of these at once on different areas of the car. When they analyse their photos, they'll be looking for any possible outliers in the data compared to what they've seen in the wind tunnel or simulations. And given the limits on aerodynamic testing under the current regulations, Flow Visualization Paint arguably has a more important role now than ever before.
So to sum up day 2 in Bahrain, how do you think it went overall?
Well, I think reliability is definitely looking strong across the whole pack. It's definitely showing that we're on the 3rd year of these regulations now, and the cars are a lot more bulletproof than they were in 2022 when they first came out. They've all set good groundwork for a strong day of testing tomorrow, finish off with plenty of laps and collect lots of data ready to analyse in the week before the Bahrain GP.
So just before we conclude today's episode, let's run through the final classification of day 2 of testing in Bahrain. Carlos Sainz leads the times today with a best lap of 1:29.921. In P2 is Sergio Perez in his Red Bull, some 7/10 behind the Ferrari of Sainz. Lewis Hamilton is 3rd after putting in an impressive 129 laps over his full day in the car. In P4 is Lando Norris, who got out for some faster runs after sitting out much of the afternoon with an issue. Daniel Ricciardo is in 5th for RB, while Charles Leclerc's best time puts him in 6th. In P7 is Lance Stroll after a solid day for Aston Martin, and Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas and Oscar Piastri round out the top 10. Logan Sargent is in 11th after his full day in the car saw him complete 117 laps, while Fernando Alonso's morning run sees him in 12th. Zhou Guanyu is P13 for Kick Sauber and Pierre Gasly is in P14. Our final drivers on the leaderboard for today are once again the 2 Hasses, with Kevin in P15 and Nico in P16, with Yuki Tsunoda's morning in the car putting him in P17. Missing drivers for today were Max Verstappen, Alex Albon and George Russell. We're already 2/3 of the way through this year's test, and the teams are all running incredibly well. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with analysis of the final day of pre-season testing in Bahrain, but for now be sure to subscribe so that you get notified when the testing show goes live. Thank you for watching and we'll see you tomorrow.